The perfect family and the first crack. From the outside, Jessica's family appeared to embody the ideal of success and unity. Their grand estate, poised atop gentle hills and surrounded by manicured gardens, was the very picture of prosperity. A testament to generations of hard work and tradition. Inside, marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and every surface seemed untouched by time or trouble. Friends and neighbors often marveled at how close-knit and loving the family seemed, envying their apparent harmony. Jessica, the eldest daughter, grew up basking in this illusion of perfection. Her father, a respected businessman, inspired awe with his stern composure and sharp intellect. Her mother, a gracious hostess and pillar of their social circle, managed the household with gentle efficiency. Jessica's younger sister, Anna, was the family's darling, her youthful beauty and effortless charm, often making her the center of attention at family gatherings and social events. In Jessica's earliest memories, the bonds between her and Anna were filled with laughter and secrets shared beneath the covers. She admired Anna's vivacity and often took on the role of protector, helping her sister navigate the pressures of their privileged upbringing. There were evenings when the whole family gathered in the sunroom, her father reading the newspaper, her mother embroidering, and the two sisters giggling over the day's adventures. These warm, fleeting moments solidified Jessica's belief that her family would always stand together. Yet, as Jessica edged into adolescence, the first subtle fissures appeared. Compliments began to land more frequently on Anna. Her quick wit at the dinner table, her effortless grades, even her way with their relatives. While Jessica learned to brush off these small slights, a quiet unease grew within her. She noticed how her father's stern gaze softened more readily in Anna's presence, how her mother's voice carried more warmth when speaking to her younger sister. The imbalance became clearer each time Jessica's achievements were met with lukewarm praise. When she excelled in school, her parents would smile and simply say, "That's expected." In contrast, if Anna brought home a report with only modest results, their mother would gush over her unique talents and shower encouragement. At family dinners, Jessica's ideas or opinions were often overshadowed by Anna's anecdotes, which the adults welcomed with indulgent laughter. Jessica's confusion turned into frustration one day when Anna accidentally broke an expensive vase in the living room. Jessica instinctively rushed to comfort her panicked sister, but when their mother discovered the scene, she immediately assumed Jessica was to blame. Anna's teary confession came later, in private, but by then the moment had passed, and Jessica realized her word would always carry less weight. Slowly, these subtle patterns wove together, forming a tapestry of favoritism that Jessica could neither ignore nor fully confront. She started to retreat into herself, channeling her hurt into relentless self-improvement, hoping that if she just achieved enough, eventually her parents would see her for who she truly was. Despite her growing misgivings, Jessica continued to fulfill her responsibilities, never allowing her disappointments to spill into open conflict. She told herself she was imagining things, that all families had their quirks, and that she just needed to try harder. Yet within her heart, the first true crack had already formed, one that, despite her best efforts, would continue to spread, undermining the foundation of everything she once believed about family, loyalty, and love. Schemes beneath the family facade. As Jessica continued to strive for her parents' elusive approval, the subtle cracks in her family's harmonious image gradually widened. Unseen by the adults, an undercurrent of rivalry began flowing between her and Anna, one that, at first, Jessica struggled to acknowledge. The house was still filled with laughter and polished surfaces, but underneath, something more insidious was taking shape. It started innocently enough. Anna, always the family favorite, began to assert her influence in ways that were easy to dismiss as sibling antics. However, these gestures carried a sharpness Jessica had never noticed before, hinting at deeper motives. Anna's tactics were gentle at first, a misplaced belonging here, a forgotten message there. When Jessica realized her favorite necklace was missing, she barely raised an eyebrow, chalking it up to her own carelessness. Later, the necklace mysteriously appeared in Anna's room, buried beneath a pile of scarves. When confronted, Anna giggled it off, blaming it on the chaos of their shared spaces. Jessica wondered if she was being paranoid, but a sense of disquiet lingered. Gradually, Anna's actions became more deliberate. Jessica would overhear her sister whispering with their mother, voices dropping the moment she entered the room. At school, rumors began circulating about Jessica's supposed arrogance, stories that could only have come from someone close. Anna would feign innocence, shaking her head sympathetically as Jessica vented about the gossip, but her eyes sparkled with mischief. Bit by bit, Anna was weaving a narrative that painted Jessica in an increasingly negative light, both within the family and among their peers. Sometimes, Anna would frame situations that cast Jessica as negligent or inconsiderate. If a chore wasn't done, Anna claimed Jessica had promised to handle it. When family friends visited, Anna found ways to steer conversations toward Jessica's recent mistakes, exaggerating minor slips into stories worth retelling. Their parents, distracted by work and social life, rarely questioned Anna's versions of events. Each incident was small, almost trivial, but together they created a web from which Jessica struggled to break free. Jessica's own vigilance and hope for reconciliation meant she rarely confronted Anna directly. Whenever she tried to express her concerns, her grievances sounded petty, further reinforcing the image Anna was constructing of a jealous, resentful sister. Even her closest friends started to pull away, wary of being caught in the siblings' unseen battle. Despite the gathering storm, Jessica clung to the idea that Anna's behavior was only a phase, something that would fade with time and maturity. But the bright, innocent bond of their childhood had been replaced by a cold calculation in Anna's eyes. In the privacy of her own thoughts, Jessica began questioning every interaction, replaying conversations for clues she might have missed. Yet she remained determined not to let bitterness take root. Unbeknownst to Jessica, Anna's motives were growing sharper and more calculated, fueled by a desire for recognition and vindication in the eyes of their parents. The prospect of inheritance, though never openly discussed, silently loomed over their interactions, an unspoken prize that twisted the sisters' relationship beyond simple rivalry. The facade of unity that the family presented to the outside world remained as flawless as ever. Yet beneath the polished surface, betrayal and ambition had begun to fester. Jessica sensed that she was standing on unstable ground, but she had not yet realized just how carefully Anna was laying the foundation for her ultimate undoing. The collapse. Jessica is cast out. The family estate, once Jessica's sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage closing in. The air inside those marble halls had grown thick with tension and suspicion, so much so that every footstep seemed to echo with doubt. Jessica could sense that something was building, an uneasy electricity humming beneath the surface. It wasn't just Anna's sly meddling anymore. It was the way her parents' glances lingered on her, searching for faults. The laughter that once echoed through the corridors became brittle, and conversations took on an edge, weighted by unspoken grievances. It all unraveled the evening her father returned home in a terrible mood, gripping a stack of documents that would become the spark for Jessica's undoing. The family gathered in the formal sitting room, a place usually reserved for celebrations or special announcements. This time, however, there was no warmth. Her father's face was carved from stone, his lips a thin, trembling line. With the entire family present, he presented his accusations, financial irregularities, confidential information that had allegedly been leaked, subtle yet damning details that cast Jessica in the role of a saboteur. Anna sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, but her eyes never left Jessica's, brimming with a mix of triumph and feigned innocence. Their mother stood close by, gaze hardened with disappointment. The evidence was meticulous, with forged messages and manipulated files. Jessica tried to protest, her voice trembling but resolute as she demanded an impartial review. But every plea was drowned out by doubt and Anna's perfectly timed tears. All the years of undercurrents and microaggressions now burst forth in a wave that threatened to sweep Jessica away. Her father's trust, once so unshakable, had vanished. He looked at her not as a daughter, but as a liability. Her mother's arms, always a place of comfort, remained firmly crossed. Anna buried her face in her hands, sobbing, whispering apologies for having discovered the evidence, claiming she wished it weren't so. The narrative had been shaped so shrewdly that even the household staff and distant relatives began to whisper about Jessica's supposed betrayal. Facing her accusers, Jessica's anger and pain warred within her. Each desperate attempt to explain was met with stone-faced judgment. No one was interested in her truth. The family had hastily closed ranks against her, eager to erase the threat to their image. The more she fought for her dignity, the more she appeared defensive, desperate, even guilty. The world she had known, its comforts, its security, even its small daily rituals, was slipping through her fingers. In the aftermath, Jessica was given a cruel ultimatum. She could leave quietly, ensuring the family's reputation remained intact, or be subjected to a public shaming no one would soon forget. Her belongings were reduced to a few suitcases packed in haste. There would be no farewells, no gestures of love or regret. Anna stood at the foot of the staircase as Jessica descended for the last time, eyes shining. Not with sorrow, but with victory, poorly disguised by a mask of concern. Stepping into the night, Jessica felt the chill of abandonment press against her skin. The vastness of the world outside the estate's gates loomed, daunting and unfamiliar. Her hands shook as she realized she had no money, no allies, not even a message of comfort from her parents. The family car that once chauffeured her to elite schools and gala events now drove past without stopping. With every step she took down the long, graveled driveway, Jessica felt the heavy shackles of her past give way to a raw, aching freedom. By the time the estate had disappeared behind her, Jessica had resolved not to let this injustice define her. Even as grief clawed at her heart, she pressed onward through the darkness, determined to survive on her own terms. The life she had cherished was gone, but in its place, a seed of strength was quietly taking root, one that would someday crack through the remnants of betrayal and loss. Years of independence. The world outside the estate's iron gates felt incomprehensibly vast, and for the first time in her life, Jessica stood alone. The brittle autumn air bit through her thin coat, whipping at her cheeks as she pressed her suitcase wheels through unfamiliar city streets. Every sound, car horns, hurried footsteps, snatches of laughter, seemed amplified. A sharp contrast to the muffled elegance of her childhood home. With nowhere to go, Jessica spent her first sleepless night hunched in a corner of a crowded bus terminal, clutching her single bag and listening to the echo of her parents' accusations. In the weeks that followed, survival became Jessica's sole priority. She moved from one cheap hostel to the next, stretching her meager savings and scouring classifieds for any job she could find. The positions were menial, waiting tables in the back of greasy diners, cleaning offices long after everyone else had gone home, handing out flyers on wind-chilled corners. The hours were grueling, and the pay was scarcely enough for rent, let alone any luxuries, but Jessica bore it all without complaint. Every ache in her muscles, every rejection, became a silent vow that she would never again be made to beg for someone's approval. Life outside the cocoon of privilege forced Jessica to reassess everything she had once taken for granted. No one cared about her family name or where she had gone to school. Connections that once opened doors now meant nothing. In these spaces, she found a blunt honesty. A woman behind the counter who taught her how to count change. A fellow waitress who slipped her a sandwich during a late-night shift. A street musician who reminded her of the quiet solace of music. Slowly, Jessica built a patchwork support system among the dispossessed and the overlooked, people who had no reason to help her except for the simple bond of shared hardship. It was in the solitude of a windowless rented room, bare except for a creaky bed and a rickety desk, that Jessica began to rediscover herself. With no one left to impress, she revisited the hobbies and dreams that had once filled her childhood afternoons. She spent late hours sketching, filling page after page with dresses and designs inspired by cityscapes and fleeting moments in passing crowds. In quiet moments before sleep, she stitched fabric scraps by hand, her fingers nimble from years of embroidery lessons. Art, once an idle pastime, became a lifeline, a means to give voice to her pain and her hopes. Determined to rise above her circumstances, Jessica sought new opportunities. She enrolled in free online design courses at the public library, sometimes standing for hours when seats ran out. On weekends, she worked a stall at a local flea market, displaying handmade accessories and unique illustrations. The little money she made helped pay for extra thread, sketch pads, and eventually a secondhand sewing machine that she guarded like treasure. Progress was agonizingly slow. There were days she wanted to give up, when sales were non-existent, when a customer scoffed at her prices, or when a jealous vendor sabotaged her display. But her setbacks only strengthened her resolve. The lessons she learned were no longer about pleasing her family, but about satisfying her own inner standard. Every small victory, overcoming a new sewing technique, positive feedback from a satisfied buyer, an invitation to join a community art show, gave Jessica the will to keep moving forward. Jessica learned to navigate the city's labyrinthine streets, writing down notes on every promising shop window or notice board. She visited local boutiques, nervously presenting her designs and accepting each rejection with a polite smile. But slowly, inevitably, someone noticed her talent. A young boutique owner approached Jessica at the flea market, intrigued by the originality and quality of her work. He offered to put a few of her pieces on consignment, nothing guaranteed, but a chance nonetheless. Her first big break did not come with fanfare. There were no grand announcements, just a quiet phone call that one of her dresses had sold. Jessica wept with relief, alone in her room, tracing the banknote with trembling fingers. With that sale came new confidence. She reached out to local designers, volunteered for behind-the-scenes work at fashion shows, studied trends on borrowed library computers. Bit by bit, Jessica's network and reputation grew, not because of her last name, but because of her unwavering commitment and originality. These years of struggle proved transformative in ways Jessica had never imagined. She learned resilience not as an abstract value, but as a necessity: how to stretch a paycheck, how to negotiate a living wage, how to find beauty in adversity. She embraced humility, accepting that failure was sometimes the best teacher. She learned who her true friends were, those who checked in during her darkest hours, who celebrated her first successes with genuine pride, who stood by her even when she had nothing but friendship to offer. Memory of her family haunted Jessica at unexpected moments. Flashes of Anna's laughter at twilight, the scent of her mother's perfume, the click of her father's shoes on marble floors. On the rare nights she allowed herself to remember, grief and anger mingled in her chest. But instead of crippling her, these emotions became fuel for her creativity. Her most acclaimed pieces often channeled the contradictions of her past, a necklace forged from broken glass, a dress stitched with hidden patterns reminiscent of the estate's ornate wallpapers. What had once been wounds now became sources of strength and meaning in her work. Eventually, Jessica's perseverance began to pay off beyond just survival. She secured an internship with a renowned local designer, thanks to a portfolio brimming with raw passion and fresh ideas. Though she started in the stockroom, her organizational skills and dedication quickly earned her greater responsibilities. In design meetings, she offered insights drawn from both her privileged upbringing and her recent hardships. Colleagues began to see Jessica not just as a survivor, but as a genuine creator in her own right. With increasing stability, Jessica found herself able to help others in the same position she once occupied. She volunteered at shelters, taught basic craft workshops for women looking to rebuild their lives, and used her growing influence to spotlight stories of resilience within the creative community. She learned to see her own journey mirrored in those around her, finding both comfort and solidarity in their shared determination. Through each hardship, each hard-won victory, Jessica forged a new sense of self, one untethered from the approval or condemnation of her family. No longer a pawn in their games of favoritism or wealth, Jessica discovered she was more than the sum of her background. She was capable, adaptable, and deserving of respect. By the time the city's skyline became as familiar as the childhood rooms she once called home, Jessica had transformed. The timid girl banished from her parents' house was gone, replaced by a woman whose identity was defined by resilience, integrity, and vision. Though she bore scars, both visible and invisible, Jessica now wore them as emblems of hard-earned independence, and quietly, within her heart, the dream of one day reclaiming her place in the world on her own terms began to flicker to life. Spectacular rise. The seeds of determination Jessica had sown during her years of hardship began to blossom in ways she'd scarcely dared to imagine. The city that once intimidated her now felt alive with possibilities. Her commitment to her craft, long hours, countless drafts, and a refusal to surrender to mediocrity slowly caught the right kind of attention. Jessica was no longer fighting to merely survive. She was crafting something original, something irrefutably hers. Her first taste of recognition came on a brisk spring afternoon at a small local fashion event. Jessica had been invited by a boutique owner who'd seen promise in her flea market creations. The event was neither glamorous nor high profile, just a repurposed warehouse strung with cafe lights and folding chairs. Yet when her first piece, a dress hand-stitched with whimsical cityscape motifs, appeared on the makeshift runway, the audience murmured in genuine appreciation. A blogger snapped photos, a minor buyer inquired about orders, and for the first time, Jessica heard her name called out with honest admiration. She went home that evening with an envelope of modest earnings, but more importantly, with the feeling she was finally being seen. With each small success, Jessica's confidence grew. She plunged into her designs with new energy, fusing urban grit and understated elegance into a signature style. She experimented with recycled and unconventional materials, determined to both minimize waste and tell a story of transformation. Her work spoke not only of beauty, but of resilience, a quality that resonated quietly and powerfully among a new generation of creators and consumers. As her reputation as an innovative designer spread through word of mouth and social media, Jessica was invited to collaborate on projects that once seemed out of her league. A local magazine asked to interview her for a feature on women breaking barriers. She approached each opportunity with humility and gratitude, grateful for both the struggles that had awakened her creativity and the chance to learn from every stumble. Jessica's circle, once limited to the margins of society, expanded to include other artists, entrepreneurs, activists, and even mentors who saw something rare in her resolve. Among these new allies, she found a young publicist named Maya, whose tenacity and vision matched her own. Maya encouraged Jessica to think bigger and bolder, convincing her to enter a regional design competition, an event where established labels and ambitious upstarts competed for a coveted grant and industry spotlight. Up against other competitors with deep pockets and industry connections, Jessica had only her sketches, her thrift store fabric finds, and a team of volunteers who believed in her story. For weeks, she and her helpers worked through the night, transforming humble materials into striking garments. There were moments the pressure seemed unbearable, as if her past was waiting to sabotage her just when she was so close to proving herself. She was haunted by the memory of her family's pronounced disappointment and Anna's orchestrated betrayal. But if those ghosts whispered in the darkness, Jessica met them with the light she'd forged for herself: determination, resourcefulness, faith. On the evening of the competition, Jessica presented her collection, Metamorphosis, to a panel of skeptical judges and a packed hall. Each piece reflected a chapter of her journey: a coat with hidden seams for shelter, a silk dress with storm-colored embroidery, a scarf made from remnants of vintage linens. The runway models, herself among them, carried not only her designs, but her story. When the applause swelled, it echoed deeper than any accolade she'd heard as a child. It was the sound of genuine achievement. The announcement of her victory stunned her. For a long moment, Jessica simply stood there, overcome by disbelief and gratitude. Her designs would be showcased in a celebrated gallery, and the grant money would allow her to establish her own atelier. When Maya hugged her, Jessica allowed herself a rare, full smile, one that reached all the way to her soul. In the months that followed, her business flourished at a furious pace. Jessica opened a studio in an old warehouse district, its windows bright and open to the ever-changing city street below. Here, she hired and trained young people with uncertain pasts, immigrants, refugees, and those like her who had endured hardship and prejudice. Her mentors advised caution, but Jessica remained committed to building an inclusive creative space, one where stories, and not status, were the measure of a person. Her designs graced the pages of national magazines and prominent fashion blogs. Major retailers expressed interest, but Jessica held firm to her principles, resisting compromise in exchange for quick growth. She experimented with limited edition lines and collaborative art projects, including a series with a well-respected sculptor that blurred the lines between clothing and installation art. Invitations to speak at conferences and panels arrived, at first with disbelief, then with practiced eloquence. Each time Jessica stood before an audience, she spoke with quiet authority of reinvention, failure, and the enduring importance of honesty. Privately, however, success did not silence the ache of her family's betrayal. The chasm they had created with callous words and decisive rejection remained a wound, even as she learned to live around it. Anna, her sister's laughter a ghost in memory, occasionally appeared in news clippings or social media posts, effortlessly charming in high society circles they once navigated together. On rare, sleepless nights, Jessica wondered if Anna ever thought of her at all. But in her new life, Jessica discovered relationships grounded in trust and mutual respect, friends and colleagues who celebrated her victories and held her gently in her disappointments. She began tentative steps toward romance, though she moved carefully, wary of heartbreak. Vulnerability, she realized, was not weakness, but the very reason her art and spirit continued to grow. Now, Jessica was no longer living under a shadow. She commissioned her own family portrait, a playful photograph with her studio team, each holding a piece of her earliest designs, all beaming at the camera. It was a powerful act of reclamation. Her atelier, bearing her signature in broad, confident script, was filled daily with the sound of laughter, frantic work, and hope. As her influence and success continued to grow, reporters and old acquaintances sought her out, fascinated by the arc of her life. Invitations to prestigious events became commonplace. Some she declined in favor of late nights at the studio, tinkering quietly with a new idea, savoring the joy of unfettered creation. Others she attended, head held high in her own unmistakable style. Through each step of her rise, Jessica carried the lessons of her trials as both armor and inspiration. She had learned not only how to rebuild from nothing, but how to lift others with her. And amid all the acclaim, she never forgot what true success meant. Not the approval of others, nor the restoration of a name, but the quiet certainty that she, and she alone, defined her own worth. Behind her, Jessica left the old world of marble halls and biting words. Ahead of her lay a future entirely her own, one illuminated by talent, integrity, and a hard-won, enduring grace. Family rumors and the day of return. Over the years, Jessica had been living a completely new life. However, one day, the name of her old family began to echo in her peaceful routine. Rumors spread like whispers from various sources: city cafes, colleagues in the fashion industry, and even anonymous late-night messages. At first, she didn't believe the rumors. Jessica had turned her back completely on her family's world and felt she no longer needed anyone's approval. But the repeated news gradually sowed seeds of doubt in her heart. Stories of the wealthy family facing a crisis, rumors of scandals involving the family business, or even whispers that her younger sister Anna might soon inherit a vast fortune. All this information was pulling her back to the past. One night, in particular, a long overdue call from an old maid confirmed the rumors. It was news that the family's financial foundation was crumbling, the business her parents managed was severely shaken, and, most importantly, the domestic truths that had started all the hatred and misunderstanding were slowly being revealed. The family's seemingly perfect image was now a topic of scandal on the lips of the world. The biggest shock was that her sister, Anna, was contacting various political and business figures to resolve the family issues, and in the process, Jessica's name was frequently mentioned. Some spoke with pity, others with condemnation. What would Jessica have done? If she had revealed the truth back then? Such judgmental voices left new scars on Jessica's familiar wounds. Despite this, Jessica was reluctant to act. She was satisfied with her current life and did not want to return to chaos. Yet, the persistent, lingering attachment to her family, the pride she wanted to prove to those who had cast her out, and warm childhood memories constantly swayed her. Night after night, she pondered the past, asking herself dozens of times, "Is there really a reason for me to go back? What does family mean to me now?" Then, one day, Jessica accidentally came across an online article mentioning both her and her family's names. The article included details about the family seeking external investors, Anna being involved in several scandals, and even predicted that Jessica would eventually return to the family. Anonymous comments were mixed with support and criticism directed at her. From that moment, complex thoughts ceaselessly occupied Jessica's mind. An old friend cautiously advised her, "Why don't you go check it out yourself?" And junior colleagues she had helped sent messages of support, saying, "We'll support whatever choice you make." Deliberating alone, Jessica suddenly realized she was no longer the person she used to be. She decided, "I've reached a point where I can protect myself, so there's nothing to fear anymore." Finally, filled with tension and hesitation, Jessica purchased a train ticket. Her destination was the old mansion she had ignored for so long, the place where her family once gathered. Looking at the passing scenery outside the train window, she mentally rehearsed the first reunion with her family hundreds of times. Her father's cold gaze, her mother's suppressed regret, and above all, Anna's duplicitous expression stood out most clearly. Upon arriving, Jessica stood motionless in front of the mansion's gate for a long time. With every step she took, past wounds resurfaced, but now even that pain served to harden her. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the doorbell, realizing she was knocking on the final door not for simple revenge for the past, but for truth, reconciliation, and her own new beginning. In the moment where rumors, doubt, injustice, and courage intersected, Jessica's reunion was not merely a meeting with family. It was the starting point of a new journey to overcome her former self, powered by the numerous pains that had fueled her growth and the pride in the life she had built for herself. The reunion, the cold presence of the abandoned daughter. Stopping in front of the mansion's gate, Jessica paused and took a deep breath. Time had certainly passed, but the grand house, bathed in the afternoon sun, looked unchanged from the past. Yet suddenly, the heavy memories and wounds hidden beneath its opulent exterior enveloped her in a chill. Stepping onto the entrance path, Jessica realized she was no longer the innocent, compliant daughter of that house. A cold gaze, a confident stride, and the strength forged by time were naturally embedded in her demeanor and expression. The doorbell rang, and the door slowly opened with a familiar rhythm. The housekeeper greeted her with a surprised look. From the housekeeper's momentary hesitation to the whispers coming from inside, Jessica realized she no longer needed to worry about peripheral eyes as she once did. She walked into the drawing room without the slightest tremor. The family was already gathered there. The first person she made eye contact with was her mother. A fleeting mix of anxiety and regret crossed her faintly trembling lips. Her father, trying to maintain his pride in silence, kept a composed posture, but his eyes held a strange perplexity mingled with a familiar coldness. All eyes were fixed on Jessica, as if attempting to uncover an old wound, and then, sitting on one side of the sofa, was Anna, still beautiful and seemingly perfect. She smiled to hide her tension, yet the jealousy and unease deep in her eyes were unmistakable. The air that solidified when Jessica and Anna's gazes met was harsher than the house's entire past. The space once filled with love and laughter now felt like the front line of a battlefield where everyone was wary of one another. Jessica stood silently before her family. No one spoke first. Breaking the long silence, her father opened his mouth heavily. "Why have you come back?" His voice carried the same authority, but now mingled with an unfamiliar anxiety. Jessica suppressed her emotions and replied calmly, "I have things I want to clarify. I no longer want to be swayed by misunderstandings or lies." Her mother instantly lowered her head, looking as though she was about to speak, and Anna sighed, averting her gaze. In their expressionless attitudes, Jessica once again keenly felt how lonely she had been in that house and how deep the wound of being abandoned was. But the current Jessica was no longer merely a victim. Poverty and suffering, the fear of standing alone, and the realization of her own worth had tempered her into a new person. Jessica looked at each family member and quietly continued. No matter what rumors circulated or what secrets anyone hid, I protected my own life. I no longer seek anyone's approval and believe I can stand on my own. Her voice was not loud, but it resonated firmly. Anna shifted uncomfortably on the sofa and mumbled, No one is perfect, Unnie, older sister. It's not all my fault that our family ended up like this. Jessica neither smiled nor showed anger. Instead, she responded with composure and coolness. It takes courage to admit responsibility, Anna. You need to find that courage now. A profound silence lingered. Every family member carried different regrets and fears amidst the ghosts of the past and unhealed wounds. But Jessica was no longer shaken. She didn't rely on them or demand forgiveness. The self-respect and independence she had found at the end of her loneliness, and the compassion and trust she had learned from the world, made her even stronger. Her mother finally silently wiped away a tear and barely managed to utter, "I'm sorry." Her father left the room without a discernible emotion, but the sense of resignation and regret in his silence was palpable. Anna looked at Jessica with a face mixed with confusion, bewilderment, and unresolved feelings. That day's encounter was not a reconciliation or a reunion, but a time for each person to confront the wounds and truths they carried. With cold logic and a resolute stance, Jessica stood before her family with an unwavering presence, showing that no fear could break her. And quietly leaving the house, Jessica reassured herself once more. No matter who I am or where I go, I am never going to be that abandoned child again. At the threshold of the reunion, she completely shed her past weakness and was now ready to tread her own path with even greater resolve. Chapter 8. The Unveiling of Truth. The days that followed Jessica's frosty reunion with her family were heavy with silence. The great halls of the old mansion, once resonant with laughter, or, at the very least, the feigned harmony of well-practiced civility, now seemed colder and emptier than ever. Yet beneath the surface, the old web of secrets and lies was beginning to unravel, thread by thread. Jessica could feel the shift. It was in the way her father's eyes followed her as she moved about the rooms, a stiffer suspicion lingering in his gaze. It was in Anna's restless energy, her constant scrolling through her phone, furtive glances, and nervous laughter. News of the family's troubles had seeped into the world outside the gate, causing distant relatives and business associates to grow either uncomfortably curious or maliciously gleeful at the misfortunes of the once untouchable household. Everyone seemed to be waiting for a scandal, for truth to finally shake loose the estate's crumbling facade. Jessica, however, was no longer the hesitant daughter she'd once been, clinging to hope that the truth would reveal itself without her prompting. She recognized that if anything were to change, it was she who would need to lead the charge for honesty, not with anger or vengeance, but with a simple, unyielding demand for facts. Her investigation began quietly. She reached out to former household staff, people who had served her family for years, who had been silent witnesses to both the overt and subtle dramas that unfolded within those walls. With humility and respect, Jessica asked them to recount their memories. Some were still loyal to her family, unwilling to say much, but others remembered Jessica's kindness from her youth and were willing to share what they knew. A former gardener remembered how certain financial documents were routinely delivered to Anna instead of their father. The family's longtime driver recalled overhearing conversations between Anna and some questionable business acquaintances, whispers about securing the future and safeguarding assets. The cook remembered late-night arguments between Anna and their mother, their voices hissing over inheritance and promises broken. Piece by piece, a picture began to form, a version of events in which Anna played a much more manipulative and central role than anyone else had realized. Jessica pored over the estate's old records, comparing notes and dates with the few loyal staff who still worked on the grounds. She found discrepancies in the accounting, unusual transfers, And most damning of all, evidence of forged documents and false signatures. The digital trail took her into the family's locked email accounts and financial systems, which, with the hesitant help of the family's former IT consultant, she managed to access. What she discovered there confirmed the worst of her suspicions. Anna had not only orchestrated Jessica's disgrace years prior, but had also manipulated finances and planted evidence to cover an ever-growing hole of mismanagement and ambition. The revelations, though devastating, brought Jessica an odd sense of clarity. Her own pain was no longer just a bitter memory, but part of a larger tapestry of deception that had damaged more than just her reputation. It had deeply wounded the family as a whole. Difficult though it was, Jessica gathered her mother and father in the old study one evening, inviting only those family friends whose trust had truly endured the years and scandals. Anna, pale and defensive, attempted to dismiss each accusation as an overblown misunderstanding, her voice growing shrill as the evidence mounted against her. But this time, Jessica's case was thorough and irrefutable, complete with bank statements, emails, transcribed confessions from trusted employees, and even audio recordings recovered from the estate's outdated security system. Her father's hands shook as he read through the folders. Her mother wept quietly in a corner, the grief and shame of years spent ignoring what she'd perhaps always suspected written plain on her face. Anna, in a last-ditch effort, tried to blame external pressures, claiming she had only done what was necessary to keep the family afloat. But the lies were exhausted. The truth echoed in every shadowed corner of that study. For Jessica, the moment was both liberating and deeply sorrowful. She hadn't been searching for revenge, only honesty, respect, and perhaps the hope that her family would finally see beyond the smokescreen Anna had carefully maintained. Distant relatives and business partners who had doubted Jessica's integrity were now forced to reckon with the new reality. The child they had so summarily cast out had, in fact, been the victim of a far-reaching betrayal. The announcement that the family's financial situation, as well as Anna's misdeeds, would be made public was met with mixed emotions. Some feared irreparable damage to the family's already tainted name. Others welcomed the cleansing force of truth. In the days that followed, lawyers and auditors pored over the records Jessica had uncovered. The media latched onto the story, as they always did with tales of power, scandal, and the fall of the mighty. Throughout it all, Jessica remained composed. She refused interviews, preferring to let the facts speak for themselves. She was present for every family meeting, every painful confession, every apology and reparation that needed to be made to those her family's actions had harmed over the years. She sat through negotiations with banks, watched as funds were rightfully redistributed, and saw to it that employees who had once been wronged received overdue compensation. In the quiet aftermath, as the mansion emptied of reporters and lawyers, Jessica wandered the halls that had once been a cage. The truth had cost her family their illusions, but it had given them, perhaps for the first time in years, a chance at reconciliation, however slim. Her parents, though devastated, offered Jessica an apology that felt genuine, free of the transactional coldness that had so often colored their interactions. Anna, faced with what she had done, could not meet Jessica's eyes. Her pride, the fuel for so much destruction, had, at last, become her undoing. That night, standing in her childhood bedroom, Jessica realized that the unveiling of truth was not an ending, but the long-overdue beginning of something new. For the first time, she felt neither abandoned nor alone. She had reclaimed her name, her dignity, and her deepest sense of self. Not by seeking punishment for the past, but by demanding the world no longer look away. In the shadow of her family's downfall, Jessica's quiet victory echoed. The future, uncertain but fully her own, stretched before her in the fresh silence, a canvas awaiting whatever honest, hard-won beauty she could bring to life confrontation and consequences. In the wake of Jessica's unflinching exposure of the truth, the family mansion, once a fortress of secrets and pride, became the stage for something unavoidable, a long overdue reckoning. The revelations Jessica had unearthed left no room for further denial or manipulation. What followed was neither triumph nor utter collapse. It was something more painful and profoundly necessary. Each family member, for the first time in years, was forced to finally confront not just the mistakes of others, but the consequences of their own choices. The days after the unveiling of Anna's deception were consumed by urgent consultations with lawyers, financial investigators, and representatives from what was left of the family's business empire. The world they had built atop a foundation of tradition and illusions now quaked with every incoming call. Each headline that splashed their name across the news, and each unblinking stare from longtime employees with uncertain futures. The air in the estate was tense with conversations their ancestors never could have imagined, negotiations not for advantage, but for survival and fairness. Jessica watched her father, so often the embodiment of stoic authority, now pacing the study in silent anguish. His reputation, honed over decades at the helm of the company, was now tainted by the scandal of negligence and misplaced trust. Their mother, once the orchestrator of their flawless public image, moved through the halls like a ghost, her composure shattered, her eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights filled with both worry and regret. But it was Anna who bore the brunt of the storm. The youngest had always basked in the family's affection, her wit and charm masking deep insecurities and, now revealed, a pattern of quietly devastating choices. As the investigation into the family's finances deepened, more discrepancies emerged, the result of Anna's misguided attempts to carve out her own power and escape the shadow of expectation. Friends turned their backs. Confidants hesitated to answer her desperate calls. For the first time, Anna was left to reckon with abandonment. Not by family, but by the friends and social circles she'd once courted so eagerly. It was Jessica, paradoxically, who served as a reluctant anchor for her family amid the chaos. She attended every meeting, unafraid to face the legal and financial specialists that picked through their legacy with clinical detachment. She insisted that all mismanaged assets and funds, stolen under Anna's direction, be returned or repaid, including to longtime staff who had endured wage delays or disrespect. Her actions drew sharp lines between what could and could not be salvaged, not for pride, but for justice and restoration. "Let's stop pretending," she said during one particularly tense session, her tone composed but firm. "We owe not just our creditors, but everyone we ever called loyal, apologies, honesty, and a chance at closure. This is about more than money. It's about respect." Anna sat across from her, head down, hands twisted in her lap. Days before, she had tried to argue, deflect, even plead for understanding. Now, silence hung between them, heavy but less sharp than the accusations that had filled the house weeks earlier. "You have to take responsibility," Jessica continued quietly, unwilling to press, but unwilling as well to let her sister slip away from the gravity of her actions. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone you hurt, intentionally or not." Their father, head bowed, finally spoke. "I failed too, in other ways," he admitted, voice low but clear. "I refused to see the signs. I let my pride outweigh my judgment. I owe you an apology, Jessica, and I owe this family the truth I was too proud to face." Their mother wept openly then, apology and grief tumbling from her lips in an emotional surge she could no longer hold back. We lost ourselves in keeping up appearances, in not wanting to see what was broken. It was not forgiveness, at least not yet, but it was the first time the entire family allowed their vulnerability to show. Outside the estate, public opinion ran wild. The media's fascination with the demise of the mighty had become cruel entertainment. Journalists circled the property, waiting for a photograph, a quote, a sign of final collapse. Friends and acquaintances quietly withdrew, and invitations to social events vanished. Their empire, once the pride of generations, had to be broken up and sold for a fraction of its value, with proceeds allocated as restitution to employees, business partners, and creditors. Amid the crushing consequences, there was no opportunity to retreat into self-pity. Jessica insisted the family conduct all affairs transparently. She invited former staff and longtime business associates to a meeting in the very hall where years earlier she herself had been cast out. There, she delivered a statement, not of blame, but of accountability and a promise to make amends. I speak not just for myself, but for everyone here who was let down or betrayed, Jessica declared. We cannot undo the damage overnight, but we can and will set things right, however long it takes. It was a cathartic act, both humbling and dignified. Some in attendance responded with quiet nods, while others confronted Anna or the parents with their grievances. In facing those they'd hurt, the family finally began to pay their true debt. Not merely financial, but moral and emotional. As the dust began to settle, the estate that had once symbolized invulnerability now felt more like a relic of past ignorance. Anna agreed to community service and financial restitution in place of formal charges, guided by Jessica to work at foundations that supported victims of corporate wrongdoing, those who had been powerless, as Jessica herself had once been. Her parents, after long discussion, chose to withdraw from public life. They sold their remaining assets, leaving behind the world of high society for something quieter, humbler, vowing to support Jessica as she built a legacy founded on compassion and honesty rather than inheritance and secrecy. For Jessica, the confrontation was both an end and a beginning. She felt the wounds of the past, abandonment, betrayal, rage, lose their toxic hold, replaced slowly by a strange, gentle hope. She walked again through city streets, no longer burdened by the weight of her family's storied name, but proud of the way she had helped steer its shipwreck toward safer, more honest shores. As the sun set on the last day that the estate truly belonged to them, Jessica stood for a long time in the driveway, the evening quiet except for an occasional far-off bird. She thought of everything she had lost and everything she stood to rebuild, not for revenge, but for justice and for a future of her own design. In paying the price, Jessica and her family had finally bought, not peace perhaps, but the right to earn it, honestly, together. Drawing the curtain on the past, beginning anew. The old estate stood silent and empty, its labyrinth of rooms echoing the last footfalls of a family that had finally confronted the truth. It was a bittersweet quiet, laced with both loss and relief. Jessica stood at the iron gates one last time, looking back not at the stones or the manicured lawns, but at the countless memories stitched into every corner. Moments of laughter and heartbreak, years of longing for belonging. She placed her hand on the cold metal, drew a steadying breath, and stepped beyond the threshold for good. In the weeks that followed, Jessica found herself navigating a world stripped of the protections and burdens of her family name. The press, once hungry for gossip and sensation, turned its gaze elsewhere. Former acquaintances who'd once measured her value by wealth and heritage now kept their distance. The few friends who reached out did so with a new, quiet respect. Lacking the insulation of her old life, Jessica was forced to rely on her own judgment, resilience, and capacity for hope. The practical work of restoring those harmed by her family's actions continued. Jessica took an active role, working with legal advisors and community leaders to ensure restitution was genuinely felt, not just seen. She visited former staff whose pensions and wages had been restored, sitting for tea in humble kitchens, listening as they slowly shared stories of dignity strained by years of uncertainty. She helped establish a foundation with the last of her family assets, its aim not merely to compensate, but to provide opportunities for education and training for future generations. The legal storm settled gradually. Anna, now removed from high society's circles, had found purpose in her community service. At first, she protested and struggled, but slowly she began to see those she helped as human, each person's pain a mirror of her own misjudgments. Jessica kept her distance at first, unsure whether forgiveness was possible, but she watched her sister from afar, observing glimmers of humility she never thought Anna capable of displaying. Their parents, having sold their final properties, retired to a modest countryside home. For the first time, their days were spent together in the quiet, not among gala crowds or the relentless machinery of business. Letters passed frequently between them and Jessica, sometimes stiff and awkward, but increasingly honest. With old feuds and ambitions fading, there arose a new willingness to acknowledge the ways they had failed each other and themselves. Jessica's own world widened in unforeseen ways. She returned to her creative passions, buoyed by the knowledge that what she built from this point forward would be truly hers. The small atelier, now staffed by ambitious newcomers, became a hub of innovation and mutual support. Having shed the pressure of perfection and pedigree, Jessica encouraged each member to bring their own story to the work, believing that true artistry was born of struggle, reinvention, and empathy. In her first public appearance after the dust had settled, Jessica spoke at a local women's college on the topic of resilience. She walked to the podium with quiet authority, not as a member of a powerful dynasty, but as a survivor. "Whatever name we inherit," she began, "it's how we choose to live that defines who we truly are." She spoke frankly about betrayal, about the pain of being cast out, and, most importantly, about the freedom that comes when you stop allowing your past to dictate your future. The weeks slipped into months, and Jessica's life blossomed with ordinary joys. She continued to volunteer in the city, teaching workshops in design and craft to women rebuilding their lives after hardship. She found comfort in new friendships, colleagues from the atelier, neighbors in her modest apartment building, people drawn not by fame, but by warmth and authenticity. As winter turned to spring, seeds sown in honesty began to bear fruit. The first scholarship, funded by her family's restitution foundation, was awarded to a young seamstress whose determination reminded Jessica of herself, the hungry, uncertain girl she'd been when first cast out. Watching this young woman accept the award, hope shining in her eyes, Jessica felt the faint ache of her scars shift into a quiet pride. Through it all, the matter of forgiveness lingered between Jessica and her family. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no sweeping away of old wounds in a single tearful scene. Instead, there were gestures, small but meaningful. Anna sent handwritten apologies, admitting to each specific hurt. Their parents, in faltering calls, wondered aloud about new traditions, asking Jessica's advice rather than assuming her compliance. Each step forward was halting and difficult, but genuine. Jessica learned to set boundaries, to protect the peace she'd carved for herself. When Anna finally asked for a meeting in person, Jessica agreed, her heart pounding with old fear and new hope. They met in a quiet city cafe, sunlight slanting through the window. Anna spoke first, her words trembling. "I can't undo what I did, but I hope, someday, you'll let me try to be better." Jessica listened, nodded, and replied, "Let's take things one day at a time." There would be no erasing the past, but there would be space for honesty, for small rebuildings, for the possibility of something new. With each passing day, Jessica found herself less defined by what she'd endured and more by what she created. Meaningful relationships rooted in honesty, business ventures built on fair practice, acts of kindness that cost nothing but meant everything. She took long walks through city parks, sketched late into the night, cooked simple meals while humming softly to herself. Joy was not loud or showy, but in the quiet steadiness of a life honestly lived. As the anniversary of her return approached, Jessica visited the old estate for the last time. It had been sold to a family with young children. Laughter now echoed down its halls. Standing at the gate, Jessica felt not regret, but gratitude, for the lessons burned into her by loss, for the clarity brought by hardship, for the future now open before her. She wrote in her journal that night, "Jessica understood now that beginnings rarely come with fanfare. More often, they're found in the quiet moments, choosing who to trust, daring to hope, refusing bitterness, and shaping a life each day out of courage and gentle resolve." As dawn broke the next morning, she rose with a sense of peace. The past, at last, was behind her. All that remained was to step forward into the sunlight of her own making.